Okay, so good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. We are going to look tonight at various aspects of the organisation. We've got a presentation to run through with you. We've got lots of people in the room. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what we've got planned. Just bear with me a minute. Technology always lets you down just as you're about to do something. There we go. Share. Back up. And there we go. So just give me a quick thumbs up if everybody's seeing my screen now. That'd be perfect. Or maybe one of the team can just acknowledge, yep, I've got a yes from Brett. Okay, so we'll get started. So my name's Steve Humphreys. I'm the Technical Commercial Manager here at NAPIT. And like I say, we're joined by other colleagues that are in the background, and you're going to hear from various voices this evening. And this is an opportunity just for us to share with you and open it up to our non-members to just so you can see a little bit about who we are and what we do as an organisation. So we've got some pre-recordings for you. We're also going to do some live technical stuff as well. And what we'd like to do as we run through the presentation is just want you to drop any questions into the chat. So if you look on Teams, you'll see above, you've got a Q&A section. And you're more than welcome just to drop your questions in there, depending on the subject we're talking about. It could be technical, could be something else. And yeah, one of the team will hopefully answer that for you as we run through the webinar. So let's have a look what we're going to run through today. So the first thing we've got on tonight's agenda is Stephen Melton, Head of Commercial. He's going to talk about who are NAPIT, what do we do, who we are. Then I'm going to take us through some top 5 technical help questions that we get into our helpline on a regular basis. We get hundreds of calls into our helpline from our members, and we've sort of sifted through the top 5. Then we're going to hear from John Eastwood, and he's our technical training manager. And we're going to look at the importance of receiving good quality training and regulated qualifications as part of the electrician's journey. Then we're going to go live again, and we're going to talk about the exciting world of renewable technologies, and particularly we're going to be looking at solar PV and energy storage. And then last but not least, we've got Dave Scully, our inspection manager, who's going to talk about what to expect on a NAPIT assessment if you're thinking about joining us as a member or maybe switching over from another provider. So with no further ado, what we'll do is we'll crack on. So like I said, the first one we've got for you is going to be from Stephen Melton, Head of Commercial. And this is going to be who are NAPIT and what do we do?
Good evening and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Steve Melton, Head of Commercial at NAPIT. I'm going to start us off this evening by telling you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. NAPIT, the National Association of Professional Inspectors and Testers, was formed as a trade association in 1992. Its aim was to be the voice of its members and to defend and advance their interests through various different industry platforms available. So, taking us right back to the start, NAPIT was formed as a trade association in 1992, and in 2004, the NAPIT Group of Companies was founded, and they launched the first competent person scheme for electrical. This was followed in 2005 by the formation of NAPIT Training, and in 2006, the rapid growth continued with competent person scheme approval for plumbing, heating, and ventilation, as well as being recognised as a Trustmark scheme operator. In 2009, NAPIT launched the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, as solar panels began popping up on rooftops all over the UK. Next up, in 2011, was the formation of the Electrical Safety Roundtable. This group provides representation for leading electrical industry stakeholders. Its aims back then and still to this day are to unite the industry by discussing challenges faced in the electrical sector, campaigns to overcome them, and enhancing the safety of all involved in the home and in the workplace. In 2012, government announced plans for its Green Deal, and NAPIT became accredited for energy efficiency measures. In 2013, along with the NIC-EIC, NAPIT creates the Registered Competent Person for Electrical, creating a database for registered competent installers. The acquisition of Stroma certification in 2019 really showed the power and progress NAPIT now possessed within the industry, and by the end of the year, the customer base was now over 14,000. This was further enhanced the following year when NAPIT acquired Trimble's certification software and launched NAPIT Fast Test. This multifunctional digital certification platform now boasts over 29,000 licenses on both Windows and mobile. And in 2022, NAPIT became part of the Fenner Group of companies. At the very top of the tree is Mike Andrews, the Chief Executive Officer. David Calburn is the Chief Operating Officer. And Frank Bertie is the Chief Technical Officer. So looking at the schemes we have available at NAPIT, alongside the Competent Person Scheme, we have the BAFE DS301 Domestic Fire Alarm Scheme, where we're the only certification body to be able to provide this as a third party. We have the Electrical Inspector Scheme, the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, known as MCS, the Electrical Third Party Certification, Energy Efficiency Measures, Portable Appliance Testing, Temporary Electrical Systems, and Trustmark. And here's a snapshot of some of the committees and accreditations that NAPIT hold. From left to right, we've got the Electrical Safety Roundtable, the EAS and JPEL committees, the Trustmark Quality Scheme, Investors in Customers Gold Award, our UCAS certification, the BAFE registration, MCS, and our 2 ISO accreditations. And here's a run through of some of the membership options we have available. We've got an associate membership, which is for local authorities, councils, housing associations that join forces with us and help them out with certain projects. We have a corporate membership for large industrial companies, insurance companies, for facilities management. We have an electrical duty holder membership. These are for duty holders of businesses, could be potentially on large plant sites, manufacturers in the industrial world. We also have NAPIT Foundation, which is available to colleges, students and training centres. There's many benefits available there, such as discounted publications, access to technical help libraries, draft certification software licenses for the purposes of practicing on in the classroom. And it's also possible for a NAPIT representative to visit the college or centre and host an educational day. NAPIT training has 4 sites across the UK, our head office and largest training centre in Mansfield, where we host the Centre of Excellence for Low Carbon Technologies. We've got Oldham in the northwest, Bristol in the southwest, and Potters Bar just to the north of London. There are 5 NAPIT publications available. EICR Codebreakers, which was first launched in 2017, now sold over 75,000 copies and in its 3rd version. There's On-Site Solutions, the Landlord's Guide to the Private Rented Sector, the Guide to Initial Verification and Periodic Inspection and Testing, and a Risk Management Code of Practice. We're now going to have a look at our NAPIT Fast Test digital certification platform. With over 25 model certificates, including 11 electrical variations and options for gas, fire, emergency lighting and ventilation. Populate essential information at the click of a button, flag overrated devices and excessive maximum ZSs. Brand your certificates with your own company logo, certification body and colour scheme. Instant retrieval of your certificate data across all devices so you never lose your information. Access the drop-down function of the award-winning NAPIT Codebreaker publication to code your observations. So that brings us to the end of the first section of today's webinar. I hope it's given you more of an insight as to who we are and what we do.
Top 5 technical help questions that come into our helpline, like I say. So let's have a look at these, and hopefully these will relate to some of you out there that are designing and installing electrical installations. So first one. So one we get quite a lot is to do with particular devices in consumer units. You know, not uncommon to have these kind of questions because we're fitting consumer units with new and wonderful things all the time now. So this one says, where do I have to install AFDD's arc fault detection devices to comply with the wiring regulations BS 7671? So what we will always do when we're giving our members information or we're running through any technical help, or anytime me or Frank present anything or do presentations, we always want to base it on what the wiring regulations say. You know, we don't want to give spurious opinion because if you've got 100 sparks in the room, that all give you 100 different answers. So we see what the standards say. So here we've got regulation 421.1.7, and on page 86, what it tells us is this: arc fault detection devices conforming to BSEN 62606 shall be provided for single phase AC circuits supplying socket outlets with a rated current not exceeding 32 amps in. And then we get these 4 areas. So the first one is high risk residential buildings, HRRBs. And these are assumed to be residential buildings that are either over 18 metres or in height or in excess of 6 stories, and it's whichever one of those is met first. So pretty straightforward. Then we come on to houses of multiple occupation, HMOs. Next, we've got purpose-built student accommodation, and then we've got care homes. So what it does say in the regs as well is if you're doing, you know, so common sense would say if you're doing consumer unit replacements, which need to include, you'd need to include AFDDs with any sockets below 32 amps in these particular areas. And also, you know, you can see where this reg came from, because originally this was quite a long regulation with lots. It was more or less all situations, but this was cut down to just make in these areas where probably it's more safety critical. You can imagine in students' accommodation, don't want to typecast all students, but trailing leads, things plugged in, getting caught under, you know, cupboards or wardrobes or whatever. So that was the question. That was the reason that we introduced those kind of areas. It does also say for all of the premises, the use of AFDDs are recommended for single phase AC circuits supplying socket outlets not exceeding 32 amps. So like I said, you know, it's recommended as well for all other areas. So that covers that one off. Let's have a look at question 2. The first 3 follow a similar theme, like I say, with devices. So this one says, if I'm extending or altering a circuit protected by a type AC RCD, am I required to replace this with a type A RCD? Now, this is quite an interesting question that came in from a member, because they've actually said, well, I know I've heard I need to get rid of type AC in certain circumstances, but I'm replacing it with have I got to replace it with a type A? So let's break this one down. So again, the regulations that points to this is 531.3.3 on page 157. And it says here, a type AC RCD shall only be used to serve fixed equipment where it is known that the load current contains no DC components. Now, this does obviously depend on the type of circuit and the equipment being used. So again, it's not necessarily a straight answer to this one. For example, if a circuit is supplying socket outlets, then the customer can plug anything in. So in that situation, you know, they're plugging in electronic equipment with DC components, replacing that type AC RCD would be something that would be required. However, if it is just purely resistive, the circuit, some fixed equipment, maybe a heater, something like that, then the AC type could potentially be left in place. Now, the other thing to add on that bottom of that question is the learner said, the member said a type A RCD. Now, that's not strictly true. So what if you do have to replace it, the device will depend on the equipment and maybe manufacturer's instructions. So the bottom for that one says different types of RCDs exist, and that depends on their behavior in the presence of DC components and frequencies, and the appropriate RCD shall be selected. So I remember a while back, we had someone that did say to us that, we heard that for EV charging equipment, for instance, it's always got to be a Type B. It does depend on manufacturer's instructions and obviously the design of that circuit, ultimately what type of RCD you put in. You know, for instance, a Type A will do up to DC components up to 6 milliamp. Then we've got a Type F, which will do up to 10 milliamp. And then you've got your Type B, which is like your rock and roll, all singing, all dancing one that will detect smooth DC residual current and trip. So that's the answer for that one, really. It does depend on the type of circuit and the equipment that's on it. Question 3. Again, we've got another device. So far we've looked at them. They've all been ones that have been in consumer units. So if a new circuit is to be installed into an existing installation, is an SPD required to be fitted? Again, we point to the regulation. So in regulation 443.4.1 on page 107 of the wiring regs, it says this: protection against transient overvoltages shall be provided where the consequence caused by overvoltage could result in the following. So that's just worth noticing in that particular sentence. Again, it's not talking about equipment particularly or the circuit itself. It's talking about the consequence that it could be caused. So we've got indent 1, which tells us serious injury to or loss of human life, which is bit safety first. So, you know, a bit self-explanatory on that one. Then we had indent 2, which has now been deleted in the corrigendum in May of this year, which said failure of a safety service as defined in part 2. So that indent has now gone. So we're left with the third one, or the second one rather, that's relevant, is significant financial or data loss. Now, it's interesting conversation in the industry at the moment about SPDs. We've recently done a podcast with Surge, which talked about their use. And, you know, we used to fit these a lot back in the day in sort of IT buildings where that significant data loss was a massive issue. So they would always have surge protection in. But these days, in reality, even in domestic settings, SPDs are a sensible option. You can buy now a consumer unit that sort of comes preloaded with a surge protection device in a Type 2. Not that expensive, but you are protecting a lot of expensive electronic equipment maybe in the home. And it also does say they took out the actual risk assessment, so you don't have to do that complicated transient over voltage calculation anymore. But what they do say is if the owner or the customer says that they're willing to take that loss or damage, then that's tolerable to them, then that is the risk that they're willing to accept in that circumstances. So there still is a risk, but it's not a risk assessment. It's more of they're taking that risk of damage to any equipment or loss they may incur. So moving on to question number 4. This one is quite a really good question because we get this a lot as well, especially when we're doing our expos and other events, doing seminars. I'm doing an EICR in a flat for a landlord and there are no smoke detectors. How do I code that? So if you're doing an electrical installation condition report, we've got a situation here where I'm thinking, oh, there's no detection. I know it's in a rental property. I remember seeing somewhere it needs to be there. How do I code that? Now, actually, this is an interesting answer because if we look at regulation 560.10 on page 229, it actually says this: fire detection and fire alarm systems shall comply with the relevant parts of BS 5839 series. So that's the British standard for the actual equipment. Therefore, it would seem common sense that this would fall outside of the inspection requirements of BS 7671 and therefore would not actually attract a code in that circumstance. But, however, there's always a but. There could be a landlord responsibility for this because if you look at sort of the legislation for England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, all those kind of devolved nations, they have got different ones similar in some circumstances. But let's take England for instance. At least one smoke detector needs to be in circulation areas on each story, and it talks about they need to be tamper-proof with 10-year lithium batteries in them. And like I say, for the different devolved nations, they'll have different sort of requirements depending on that particular legislation for that country. So although it's not a requirement within BSM 671, there is still this legally binding sort of commitment for landlords to make sure that their properties are safe and have got proper fire detection systems in them. It's also worth noting, if this question said something like there is existing smoke detectors, although the detectors themselves wouldn't fall under BSM 671, they'd fall under BS 5839. As said, the hard wiring or the supply to them, if their mains wired, would actually fall under the scope of BSM 671 and any EICR that you was performing. For example, if the inspector finds the cables not supported and are subject to collapse and couldn't cause entanglement, for instance, then we're going to give that C2 because it's an endangerment to life. So the wiring, yes. The actual equipment in this instance is a no. And the last question we get, which is again is a really good question we got from one of our members. During a consumer unit change, I discovered there is no circuit protective conductor, CPC, for the lighting circuits. What are my options? So again, if we look at what the regulations say in 411.1 on page 63, we can quite clearly see that an indent 2 fault protection is provided by protective earthing, protective equipotential bonding, and automatic disconnection in case of a fault, so ADS. So we need those things in place for our protective devices to trip. Don't want to take you back to college, but that's basically the way it works. So it tells us we need one, okay? And then the second part of that question really is on 543.2.1 is, okay, if we know we need one, what do we actually need to use? So if we assume, because we haven't got more context to this question, if we assume that it is in a domestic situation, so we haven't really got metallic containment or conduit or trunking that can be used as the CPC in this instance, we're sort of looking really at indents 1 and 2, aren't we? Because practically this would involve either a rewire in twin and earth, and that is obviously a conductor would then be in the cable, or another option is for us to maybe run a single core cable of the appropriate size cross-sectional area to each of those lighting points that require that CPC to be there. So, you know, if it was more of a, let's say, a commercial industrial situation, then others on that list may apply. But if we keep it purely domestic, then I think that those would be the talks you'd be having with the client. Look, we need to get this in to make it safe because we know we need one, and these are our options that are open to us. So that's a little bit about our top 5 of questions that we tend to get. Like I say, we get hundreds and hundreds of questions, and they're all varied. You know, and our team are always on hand to help our members and just try and guide them using the regulations, using their vast technical knowledge to try and help them on their installs, design, and commission and such like. John Eastwood, our technical training manager, he's going to give us, we did a podcast recently that talked about the importance of good quality training and qualifications. So I'll stop sharing and hand over to Alex.
Hello and welcome to another What's Current podcast from NAPIT. I'm joined here today by John from NAPIT Training. So it's an internal one today, and we're going to talk about all things training, John. So, John, start with a bit of an obvious question. You know, why is it so important for electricians these days to have that proper accredited training and obviously qualifications under the belt?
Well, to meet the EAS requirements, we have to show that we've got up-to-date CPD and that we understand the competencies within the industry. The technology is moving on so fast, and the protective devices that we use within the installations, there's a lot of information that's required to ensure you're fitting the right device in the right place for all these new modern technologies that are coming along. So Reg 16 of the Electricity at Work regs states you have to be competent to do your role. And if we find that people are not up to date, and they're obviously not competent to use the new equipment that's out there.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Because when you look at that regulation, it talks about the competency word, which has always been a grey area. It talks about the skills, knowledge and experience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So sometimes I think some of those get missed to wrap up that competence. So, you know, qualifications are a part of that, aren't they, really?
And within the regulations, the change to the electricity, the BS7671 this time was that the competent person went out, didn't it? It was a skilled person now who had certification, training, and the experience to do the role.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It now has got that definition of skilled, hasn't it? Yeah. And I think for me, what I've seen in the industry, especially lately, is we're getting a lot of these like CPD kind of online courses, and I don't think they're a substitute for a qualification where it teaches you the practical and knowledge skills to install certain equipment, really.
I think I hate to be in that position where I'm challenged by a legal authority to prove whether I was competent to install something because something went wrong. And if you didn't have a certificate to prove that you were competent, showing that you'd done a CPD watching a video for an hour, I don't think I'd stand up in court.
No, I think I agree with you on that one. So on the back of that then, what type of learners are we getting into NAPIT training? Are we sort of talking about our one-man bands, or have we got some of these big companies that are coming over?
So
A bit of a mix?
we do have some very large companies that work with us, but also we do get the one-man bands, the smaller companies. And what we do get is we get a lot of repeat business because they enjoyed the training they've done. And when a new course comes out that's relevant to their work, they come back. And it's quite nice to see in the classroom somebody who comes back and then greets the tutor with a smile and, hiya, that was brilliant last time we did whatever course it was, and they're back again. So if you enjoy what you do, you come back to the same place, don't you?
Yeah, that says a lot about the quality of training. And I presume a lot of those would be members that are upskilling as well, maybe on renewables qualifications.
Just recently, we've had a big push on the PV and then the EESS to go with that battery storage, as we call it. It's massive technologies coming along, but it's real technicalities that people are getting wrong.
Yeah.
And the installs are not great out there when you go and have a look.
Yeah. So we've got to make sure we're giving people the right information that's tied into the standards and the regulations and what they say.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the trainers themselves then. So what kind of backgrounds are your trainers from that you manage?
So we've got trainers from many different areas of the industry. I mean, we've got ex-forces people, we've got people that have run their own businesses, we've got people that are predominantly been in education, so understand the education side of the delivery, and they've got a vast amount of knowledge. And when it's shared throughout the team, it just allows us all to gain that experience and update our own CPD in a way.
Yeah.
Make sure we're working to current industry standards and technical data.
And people, I presume, that are passionate about passing on that knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice to see some smiles in the room.
Yeah, I think back to my time when I came into training in about 2011, 2012, and that was that nagging thought of, could I pass this knowledge on to the next generation, which sounds like a really noble thing to do. But it was a little bit of that, I suppose. Like, you know, could I stand in front of a classroom of apprentices?
You're as nervous as they are on
Yeah.
the first day to who are the people you're going to meet. And you find that people don't come in for training because they're scared they're going to fail. Well, actually, if you come in and put the effort in, normally you'll pass because you've put the effort in. You've got the knowledge because you're out in industry and you're upskilling yourself. But it is scary if you're an older person and you're coming back into a classroom environment after 20, 30 years.
Yeah. I remember my first lesson. I was so nervous. I went home to the wife and said, I'm never doing this again. And then I'm getting the tools back out. But yeah, I kept at it. And it was such a rewarding part of education and delivery. Is so good to be in.
One of them smiley things is reading a register's often printed backwards, so you get a surname first. And my first lesson, there was a guy called Paul Phillip. And I called him Philip Paul for the whole year, and eventually he corrected me as a polite
At the end.
Yeah.
I love that. So, like I say, I've mentioned my background really is like, you know, that apprenticeship route that I did. And I really had a good experience at a technical college back in the Midlands, where we had a really nice mix of theory and practical. So sort of theory in the morning where you learn that underpinning knowledge, and then maybe workshop in the afternoon to put that into practice. What's the sort of your approach here at NAPIT? Is it kind of similar?
Very similar. We like to try and get the technical knowledge over first, and then we've got all rigs and things to practice on and test on and understand the technicalities of. But again, you're coming in here to learn the technical data. We don't often focus on manufacturer's information. We focus on the actual standards that you need to learn to apply any of the technologies you're going to be fitting or up to date in the regulations. We don't dwell upon certain technology, as in certain manufacturer's equipment, which is often people come in and complain we've not shown them how to connect to a sun-sink or a so-and-so inverter, and that's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is to show them how an inverter works and how you do connect to it, not where the plug goes.
Yeah, it's sort of the whys and wheres before it rather than what it does, isn't it? Yeah, I can get that, because there's going to be so many different software applications for those kind of technologies that you'd be teaching forever, wouldn't you, if that was the case? And do you sort of getting into that a little bit more? Is that more of a blended approach as well? So everything these days doesn't need to be necessarily front-facing in a classroom?
Right, so we're trying to build some online modules that people can complete before they come into NAPIT, so they've got some pre-knowledge, so we can actually get more deeper into the technology and more deeper into how it works when they come in. Those pre-learning experiences are going to be more of a focus for us in the next year or two, because people would prefer to learn on a night at home and then spend their time in the classroom focusing on the main bits and not on the waffle, as we like to call it, around those technologies.
We like to waffle as electricians sometimes.
Electricians, we like as many abbreviations as we can dream up, don't we?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that blended approach is there. So you've got a bit of that online learning maybe beforehand and during, But if you need to come in for something practical, we can teach you that as well. Obviously, they're going to have to come in for the assessments as well. And then getting that underpinning knowledge that may be a bit tricky. Is that more challenging for the trainers to get over?
Yeah, I think as
maybe the maths, the formulas.
As we get more and deeper and deeper into how these newer technologies work, it always comes with a huge set of math calculations. And legally we need to do those to supply them to the customer. Because if we don't give the customer a proper estimate of what they're going to get back from these technologies, really we're not doing ourselves any justice. And later, I think it will come back and bite some electricians.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about what kind of things that NAPIT are actually doing then. So you've probably got your bread and butter stuff that we all know, sort of, your inspection and testing and, your regs courses, but what else is out there?
So just to jump in there, we break down our inspection test into periodic inspection test and the initial verification. What we try to do is, if you're a novice, we try and get you in early for the initial verification where you can have some practice testing. But if you are an experienced person, you just want the periodic, the EICR stuff, you're just coming for a shorter course. In blending those courses together, as people call it, the 239152, that's a course where there is no practical experience within it, and people need to be aware of that because it's part of Seeing Guild's remit that they don't get any practice.
Okay, so they come in with that knowledge and they should be able to do it already. So
right.
It's really just an assessment.
But teach them how to do the tests.
Yeah,
expect them then to be capable of doing them correctly. But the other technology we're on, obviously EV charging is getting more and more popular. Funny driving down today, I saw many vans on the motorway with EV on the side of them. It seems to be picking up big. And the changes to those technologies in the last few years means that they're easier to install and more suitable for most electrical environments. We also do solar PV and EESS that we try and blend together, but they can be done as separate courses. That's where the money seems to be going at the moment, with the price of energy going up through the roof. If you can generate your own and store your own and use it when you want it, customers are going to be making a fair bit of money back.
So you're seeing a bit of an uptake in those renewable energies. I mean, it's a brave new world for electricians, if you think about it, to make that step, because it's dealing with DC voltages and stuff like that.
Which is where the training's all about. It's getting them to understand what happens when we're playing with DC. The other protective devices need to be in place. It's okay thinking you know what you're doing, but if you get it wrong, it's a big impact on the customer and their installation, and it can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
So it is a tough topic, shall we say, but it's certainly we reward it if the candidate gets it right, because they can then open up to doing all new builds and renewable technologies in it. So there's a lot more opportunities once you've got the certification.
Yeah.
And most electricians don't climb on a roof. They employ a roofing company to install bands.
Yeah.
So that's what most people off, is climbing on the roof.
Yeah, it is interesting to see how the modern workforce of electricians will move into that renewables world. Some might want to stay comfortable with sockets and lights and what they've always done, but it's an exciting time really to be in training an electrician, if you think about it.
Yeah, and the amount of work that could be opening up to somebody who upskills is completely different to the current work they're doing. So that the opportunities are vast, aren't they?
But I think you've hit the nail on the head. We've got to make sure that the training we deliver and the qualifications that we go with have got to have that quality mark, haven't they? We're not interested in pushing the numbers. What we're interested in is making sure we're putting good installers out there at the end of the day.
And I think those that have been trained at NAPIT realise we only run small groups. So you're not going to be in a classroom with 25, 26.
Okay, what's your typical class size then?
Classroom's normally about 8 to 10.
Oh, wow.
10's definitely the max.
Yeah.
Unless we're delivering a course that's basically paper-based, which is the regs course, then you might be in with a larger group, but that's a different matter. There's no hands-on delivery there. Yeah. All the ones that have practical elements in, we try and keep them to 8, 10 if it's a bigger centre.
Yeah.
So
I like the fact that you're still keeping that practical element in, because I think I've seen over the years the watering down of that, perhaps directly at some colleges, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, where maybe you've seen like more classroom time rather than getting, because they're coming to do a practical task, aren't they? It's a practical job at the end of the day.
So they're making off of cables and things like that. We don't make qualified electricians come in and do that, but it's the other bits of getting hold of the kit and understanding how heavy it is and what they do it around. Yeah, all the things that they've always wanted to do is touch, feel and get hold of safely. We give them that opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen obviously the rigs that you've got at your site. So you've got sightseeing. Tell us where you are doing the training.
So we've got Mansfield's head office, we've got Oldham, we've got Bristol, and we've got Potter's Bar. And then we have another site in Halifax where we deliver the environmental bits and pieces, the EV, the PV, and the ESS.
Yeah, and is there anything you do that's more a little bit bespoke for companies out there, or stuff like that as well? Maybe councils.
If you require training on really any element of electrical, we'll be bespoke a course. So we've got a team that do the development, and we go out and we deliver exactly what you've requested.
And you could deliver out in their work environment.
Out their work environment, we have rigs we can take with us that fit into vehicles, and we can deliver just about any course that's required off-site.
Wow.
We just need to get permission from the awarding authorities sometimes if you want a certificate to go with it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So you've got all angles covered. So if I'm a Sparky and I'm out there looking to add some qualifications to my CV, you've talked about a few, but, if I'm going to ask those renewables, do I go on the website and have a look?
So we've got a website with all the courses laid out. Just pop in the search on NAPIT training, and it'll give you the different sites that the courses are available at and what the courses are.
And there's open to members, non-members.
Correct. Anybody can apply. Members obviously gain a discount.
Oh, discount for members. Yeah, here first.
Yeah.
Always a discount. Everyone likes a discount. Well, that's brilliant, John. Thanks for your time today, and thanks for sharing a little bit about the training side and what that looks like. It's been really useful. Hopefully, been enjoyable and enjoyable for our listeners and our watchers.
Oh, come and join us and have a good day at NAPIT.
Okay. So thanks for listening to another What's Current podcast at NAPIT. I hope you've enjoyed that and it's been useful. Like John says, come and sign up for some training if you're interested, and hopefully see you on the next one.
Okay. Excellent. Well, hopefully that was a little bit of insight into the training side of what we do. There's much more to us than, just being one of the, the biggest CPSs out there. Obviously, we've got that training side to us as well, where we can offer that bespoke training and everything. So yeah, get onto the website, have a look if you're interested in, especially in that renewables world, which segues nicely into our next section. It's like we planned it. We're going to look at the exciting world of renewable technologies. And as I was talking with John there, you can sort of see that a lot of electricians out there are making that transition into this brave new world. Some aren't. Some are staying comfortable and stopping with the more traditional stuff. But it is an exciting time to be out there and getting involved in these things. And obviously, we're going to look at a couple. We're going to look at solar PV, which has been around for many years, but has had an uplift again as related to battery storage. So that's come back online quite a lot. So let's have a look at these technologies in a bit more detail. So obviously, what's very important is we always apply the standards to these things. I think as installers, we all tend to think, right, let's get the tools out, let's get the equipment, I can do that and rush and do it. But we've got to realize that the standards are there for a reason. They're there to protect ourselves, the consumers as well. So obviously, our go-to is BS 7671. And in particular, what we'd be looking at in this area is section 712, which deals with solar PV in special locations, and also section 551, which looks at generating sets, which solar PV is classed as a generating set. So that's our go-to. Other parts of the regs obviously apply as well. Then if we go to the code of practice that the IET produced for grid-connected solar photovoltaic systems, that's a comprehensive sort of code of practice out there that's got the requirements for the design, the installation, specification, commissioning of those systems around the UK. And then finally, we've got this one, the MCS documentation, their standards document, which is MIS 3002. That's the solar PV standards you see there. And those are all freely available off the MCS website. So if you're an MCS contractor, this is what you'd have to be installing to, is their standards. It's that quality pipe mark kind of association that you get from MCS. So yeah, we're following standards and industry guidance. We show these at a lot of our shows. These are the sort of the horror story pictures we get. So you can see there, some modules that have been put onto a roof. You can see that the rails have literally been just screwed to concrete blocks. There's no proper design gone into that. It's just sat there on that slope of that roof. Not a great install, as you can see. And what happened with this one in particular is we got some wind lift underneath there, and it resulted in those crashing to the floor, as you can see down by the side of that property. All mangled rails and smashed panels and breeze blocks all over the place, which isn't great. And these are the kind of things that we need for installers to understand. And like John mentioned in that video, you might start getting a roofer involved in your PV jobs or doing it yourself. It's sort of that crossover really, where the roofer needs to work in conjunction with the PV installer, and the PV installer needs to work in conjunction with the roofer, because we sit in different trades in that respect. But it's having that full understanding of what we can and can't do. Got another one here to show you. You can see here that underneath this panel, and these are actually inspections that some of our team went out to look at, and this is the kind of things we are finding, is that it tells us in that regulation there that cables shall not be placed directly on the surface of the roof. These clearly are just lying on the roof, all coiled up, really messy. And also you can see underneath there we've got an unsupported MC4 connector. None of this has been tie wrapped to the rails. A very messy install. Over time, with wind and vibration and movement and the rest of it, those are just going to become weathered and rotten and not last very long in that environment. So, this is why we need to make sure that we are installing these kind of jobs to a high standard. Let's have a look at a little bit what if for the novices out there, or excuse me if you already know this, but this is a typical sort of small solar PV system you would find. That's got a single string on a roof. The module's made up there on the left-hand side into your array, fed back into your DC isolator, into your inverter, and then you've got your AC isolator, because this is separate, it's in the loft, so we've got local isolation, and then move down into maybe the garage position or wherever that is, where the intake is, to our consumer units, where our supply intake position is, another AC isolator, and you see there a generation meter as well, which, whether that's needed or not at the moment because of the feed-in tariff no longer being there, or the smart export guarantee. So, there's certain types of meters that are used, but we know through smart meters, apps, we can measure the output of these things differently now. And you've got obviously your cables and components there as well. So that's a typical sort of system. Big one in the industry at the moment that's causing a lot of noise for those that are installing these kind of systems, you might have seen it, is isolation, especially DC isolation. So again, what the regs do tell us in 712.537.2.101 is that we do need to have a means of isolating the DC side from the inverter. So this is to facilitate maintenance, or perhaps swapping out the inverter as a whole, whatever that may be. So that's why you've got your DC isolator there. And like I say, it's a bit of a noise in the industry at the minute. Some people, they are sometimes included on the inverter, but remember they still need to conform to, a 60947-3. So it can't just be a spurious inverter, means of isolation and an isolating switch. So if it's included on the inverter, like I say, the consensus that's coming out quite a bit in the moment is that it's not required, and an external one's not required. But that is there from a point of safety, and actually some inverter manufacturers are not doing MC4 connections into the bottom of their inverter anymore. So there could be an argument that if that array from the roof, the only means of isolation is in the loft or perhaps on the roof itself, you could have then live DC cables with hundreds of volts coming into your inverter with no other means of isolating it if you can't get up to that roof. So we at NAPIT would always say, would rather fit them. We're speaking to contractors about that and our members, and seeing what the consensus is. So it's not a blanket thing. There was a document from the FPA, which was RC62, that said eliminate DC isolators where they're installed on the inverter where possible, but everyone seems to be forgetting the where possible bit. So in like the scenario I just gave you, it still might be needed to include that external DC isolator. But we don't want to go into that too much. There's already, like I say, enough noise in the industry about it. Feel free to pop some questions in the chat about that if you've got any experience of that. That'd be good to know. Feedback, anyone that's doing any of those installs at the moment. One of the reasons that we do get problems with DC isolators, and it does cause the majority of faults resulting in fires, that data is true. That's not to say it's a fault of the equipment or its intended use. It's because what we get is things like this. So you can see on the left hand side you've got a DC isolator with your jumper cables pre-assembled in there, because obviously when we get DC arcs, those tend to be a bit more ferocious, for want of a better word. So we have these jumper cables in to diffuse that arc in stages, and the connections have got to be right into that DC isolator. And what you can see on the right hand side there is some installers that have not understood all how to install these things. Just had a little bit of a guess at it, not followed your manufacturer's instructions, and completely got it wrong and created a real danger in those situations. So that one gets a tick, and those two obviously are not going to get a tick because they've been installed badly. That moves us on then to things like labeling, so identification and notices in 712.514. And what was good about Amendment 2 is it did take some of those sort of sticking labeling on absolutely everything in the intake position on the consumer. It was plastering labels absolutely everywhere, which felt a bit unnecessary. But what we do have to do is we still have to put them where there are danger and they are warning notices. So the first one on your left hand side there is talking about there's dual supplies. We've got AC, we've got DC. If someone else coming after you and they're not used to, didn't know there was a PV rig or a battery storage system, for instance, then they need to know that that's been isolated or know how to safely isolate both aspects on parallel supplies. The one in the middle, solar PV on the roof, is really important because that will indicate to, say, firefighters and how they deal with that fire that there is an array on the roof. So that's an important one. And then you've got your standard labels on your right-hand side, warning of DC voltages and such like. So they should be put in those appropriate positions. And you can get those kind of things from most wholesalers. So labelling still needs to go in, and that's a requirement of the regulations like I say, in section 712.514. Another one that gets a bit of a hot topic and get people hot under the collar on social media is, do we need surge protection on solar PV? And it's a bit like I said previously in one of the questions we had in the top 5. You know, surge is always a good idea, especially when you've got a £7,000-8,000 inverter sitting there. You know, that you don't want that to go bang. But what it does say in this regulation 443.101 in section 712, it says that where protection against transient overvoltage is required by section 443. So basically what that's saying in layman's terms, if it's on the AC side of the system, then we need to make sure it's applied to the DC side of the PV installation as well. And not a lot of people know that. We've got to make sure that we are following these regulations, understanding these little nuances we might not know about. If it's got AC on the installation, we need to make sure it's on the DC side as well. And then inspection and testing, obviously, like John alluded to in the training, we don't get you in and teach you how to suck eggs. We take it you're competent in your trade as an electrician and you've done a level 3 inspection and testing qualification, something like a 239-152, sitting guilds, EAL or an LCL awards equivalent. But so obviously the requirements of Part 6 of BS 7671 apply and Guidance Notes 3. But what we would need to understand is the differences in testing the DC side. So, you know, there'll be things like how do you do insulation resistance testing perhaps on the array, on the roof, including the cabling. Also, are we doing a string test? So measuring the voltage and the current that's flowing through the array. And that would all be captured in a PV array test report like you can see there. So that wouldn't be a document that's encompassed in your electrical installation certificate or your electrical installation condition report. And actually on our fast test, our software, for you that are out there that are interested, have a look at that as well. Brilliant piece of software. That is all electronic on there as well. So we've got a PV certificate that deals with this, as well as our EV one, and we've got our battery storage one coming real soon as well. So these are all electronic to make sure you can get these over to your clients, and they've got that documentation. Coming into land on solar PV then, so what we've got here is we've got maintenance and fault finding. So let's say, for instance, you're not just doing installs of PV, you might get a job doing the maintenance or going around correcting someone else's work, like on some of the horror stories we showed you. And you'd look at things like, you know, you might do an electrical installation condition report if it's required. If you've got access to the roof, perhaps you'd check that the fixings are okay, the cables are in good condition, the roof is watertight, not leaking. You'd see if the modules perhaps are just starting to give up a little bit. Maybe just clean the array. Just be aware what you use on that, and then checking the performance. Now, obviously, with apps and things like microinverters, that's quite simple on an app to see if there's any shading that may be affecting it. So, you know, the client wants the bang for their buck. You said it was going to do this, maybe it's not, and you can find out the reasons why, which leads on to fault finding as well. So obviously, if you're fault finding, that approach for an electrician is pretty straightforward. You've just got to have a sort of a symptomatic approach to that. So you look at the symptom. Normally, off the client would tell you, "Oh, I'm getting no generation. The inverter display's gone off, whatever it may be." You'd investigate that possible cause of why that might be, starting with the most simple things. Could be that someone's just switched off the DC isolator, or an MC4 connection's come loose and disconnected, and then obviously you'd find the remedy to put that right. So, and if you do any of our training, it does include the installation, the design, the installation, commissioning, and maintenance and fault finding as well on those qualifications. Right, bringing us on to electrical energy storage systems, but we'll just call it battery storage for time purposes. We've still got the same legislation applies. So BS 7671 is still our go-to. And where we're looking here is in obviously all parts of the regs apply, as I said earlier. But what we are checking as well is section 551 again, dealing with generation. Generators in particular, and battery installations are classed as generators. And also our new chapter of chapter 82, where we're looking at prosumers installations. So, where we're becoming consumers of electricity, but also we're feeding back into the grid as well. We've got our codes of practice like we did with solar, electrical energy storage systems, and then we've got more MCS documents, and this is the battery standard that gives us a lot more information for MCS contractors and what they must do for their particular installs. Also, another consideration, and this does apply actually to solar PV as well, I just decided to put it in this particular slide, is that if we look at the ENA engineering recommendations, the Energy Network Association, they'll have this notification guidelines. So if it's something like G98, for instance, that's generally, it's not an exact rule, that is for installations with the total generation up to 16 amps per phase. And the one you've got there at the bottom with the little step diagram is if the system falls within the scope of G98, the system can be installed and commissioned, and then you still need to notify the DNO within 28 working days, especially if you've got a combined system of solar PV and battery, and you're talking 32 amps per phase, then that's going to end up falling into G99. So we know there's loads of installs out there that haven't been notified at all, but the way this is going with prosumers, the DNOs do need to know, and this feeds into our grid, and making sure it's fit for purpose in this modern era of prosumers. A bit of basics on the electrical energy storage systems themselves. So what you've got here is you've got, you can either have it in connected mode, and you can see from that diagram from the code of practice there, we've got a local generation from solar PV coming in there into an inverter. And where you see that term PCE, in case you're wondering, that's what the code of practice calls it. To me and you, we're talking about the inverter really, although in these circumstances, the inverter is much more than an inverter. So it's doing lots more. It's the brains of the operation really. So it's got a lot more going on. So it's power conversion equipment is its proper terminology. So that operated mode is where the grid is connected in connected mode, and our generation is doing its thing, either feeding back into the house, charging the battery, whatever that may be. And then a term you might not be familiar with is called island mode. And we've got to be careful with this term because island mode gets all sort of squashed together with terms like UPS, EPS, off-grid, and they all seem to blend into one, especially with inverter manufacturers. But you've got to be really careful. When we talk about island mode, this is a mode where all of part of the consumer's installation is disconnected from the DNO. We haven't got a grid supply, okay? But certain parts of the installation can remain energized. So for instance, you could have a separate board that is for maintain loads. So generally everything else would go off that's unimportant, but you might choose to keep a freezer socket on, Wi-Fi connection, perhaps some landing light in a domestic situation. It's not going to last forever off the battery, but it should be able to keep that property going until the mains is restored. So that's what we mean by islanding mode. What kind of systems can we get? Well, we can get various systems. The other ones are available. We haven't just sided with Tesla Powerwalls, but that's obviously a nice looking unit. There you've got where everything would sit in there. So all your batteries, all your inverter, all of the component parts sit within that one unit. So that's a good option, off the shelf product. But you've also got your discrete battery storage systems. So this is where it might be from 2 or more different parts, and this could be different manufacturers. So package system type tested, off the shelf, pretty straightforward. fit to manufacturer's instructions in conjunction with BSM 671, whereas your discrete mode your discrete component one needs a little bit more of the designer to check that things work with each other. So is it compatible with those component parts? Lots to consider for the design and installation, especially when in island mode. What is the means of earthing? Have we got the troublesome PME system there that gives us loads of grief with everything we install? What are our proposed means of isolation? How are we got fault protection and additional protection if needed? And what are we doing? What does the customer actually want with this? What do they want it for? Do they need it as a backup supply in island mode, or do they just want to save on their bills and charge the battery in the day, not bothered what happens overnight, don't want to feed back to the grid at any time? So you need to speak to your customers about what kind of systems they want. I've already mentioned this a little bit, but this is really important. So we're going to look at 3 slides now, which really are key if you're thinking to get into these systems. And this is why training is absolutely key. Something called an island mode isolator. Obviously, when it's in island mode, we need to isolate. Now, why do we need to do that? Well, those 3 bullet points explain it. So basically, to comply with Regulation 21 of the ESQ-CR regulations, we've got to make sure that we are not backfeeding any power in island mode back to the actual distribution system, because that could be a linesman working on the grid. Your local generation is feeding backwards and actually going to do someone a mischief that's working on the distribution system. So, this is all about parallel supplies. So that is a legal requirement. And also we're complying with BSM 671 and especially section 551. So an island mode isolator causes a bit of grief in the industry as well, because is it internal to the actual inverter? Is it something that needs to be separately retrofitted external to the inverter? What we do know is that it needs to be something like a BSN 60947-3. We can't really use contactors in this instance because a contactor will fault closed when it magnetizes, so we could be feeding back to the grid. So we've got to be careful and speak to the inverter manufacturers that it does what it says on the tin, which also lends itself to means of earthing. So for those that remember the days of doing sort of diesel generators, you used to have to, wherever they were, used to have them a lot at supermarkets or MOD places. If you put one of those in and you've got a UPS system that sort of runs in between that generator kicking in, you used to have to spike them, because if you think about it, if it's gone in island mode, the regulations tell us that we cannot now rely on the distributor's earth connection. It may still be there, but we cannot rely on it. So we took our training rig out recently to a few shows, and people see our earth electrode on our training rig and say, that's TT'd. It's not TT. When it goes into island mode, it's TNS. And there's a diagram in a bit that shows that. So it says if we can't rely on the distributor's earth in island mode, then we need an additional earth electrode for these TN systems. If it's a TT system, obviously, and it's a stable earth electrode, below 200 ohms, then actually we can use that earth electrode as part of the system. But for TN systems, it's vital that an earth electrode, if it's capable of island mode operation, is installed. And again, that relates to this thing called the neutral earth bond relay. So this is where in connected mode, what would happen as soon as it goes into island mode, the island mode isolator line and neutral open, and then the neutral bond relay closes. And that's done in a fraction of a second when it goes into island mode. Now, like you saw in that picture of the Tesla Powerwall, that could all be done internally, or it could be external components that sit outside. And this is the reason why. So if you look at the top diagram, what you can see there is you can see that we've got a PME earthing system coming in, and the top one is correct. So you can just make out that the island mode, if I just do, hopefully you're seeing that, that's our island mode isolator. That is open because it's gone into island mode. This consumer earth electrode is in there that we've put in, and then we can see here that our neutral earth bond relay is closed. So we've created, let's imagine there's a break here in this cable on the PME, we've created our own TNS earthing system because this is sitting independent of anything coming from the grid, and we're not feeding backwards. And then you can see where that's been done incorrectly, because what we've got here is the neutral hasn't broken in this instance. We've created almost circulating neutral currents in this instance, which is a possibility because we've got 2 points of neutral bonded to earth, and this is not permitted. This can cause RCDs to go doolally and all kinds of weird and wonderful things as well. Still considering design, what we've got to make sure is when we're fitting heavy bits of kit to the wall, inverters, especially if they've got transformers in them, batteries are going to be heavy, that we have got the right support. You know, I don't think some yellow raw plugs and an 1.5" or whatever you're going to use is going to cut it in this instance. So we're making sure that we're installing these things properly, like I say, with manufacturer's instructions. Have we got adequate lighting, workspace, access, ventilation? You know, if we are using lead acid batteries instead of lithium ion, then actually, you know, those are prone to gassing. So we need to make sure that that gassing is dispersed. We've all been in situations where we've installed consume units, and that's been a bit of a squeeze to get those, you know, sort of in a working area where it's not great. So we need to make sure if we're installing these systems, they are accessible. Also, what's worth considering with that as well, which isn't on the slide, is that we might need to have linked fire detection. So if, for instance, you're putting some equipment in the loft, it does say is where these are in rooms where they're not frequently visited or rarely visited, like lofts, maybe basements, whatever that may be, that it recommends fire detection is put in there as well as a safety measure. One slide we always like to show on this is because, again, this is quite big in the industry at the minute, is when we're fitting these kind of systems, and again, this applies to anything that feeds back in. So solar PV would fall into this remit. If we're using devices, overcurrent protected devices, whatever that may be, we need to take account of possible directions of current flow and its polarity. So you can see there on the diagram, the example where we've clearly got marked line in and line out on our load. These are classed as unidirectional devices because they're clearly marked for that. So sometimes they could be on the side of the device, sometimes it could be on the front of the device, but actually if we're feeding energy back in from a local generation, we've got current coming the other way, we need to ensure that the device is bi-directional. Okay, so very important that you speak to manufacturers. You know, we've got a Hager one as an example there. Lots of manufacturers do these bi-directional devices because we don't want to render them useless by feeding current in the wrong way, so they don't work for full protection, additional protection, whatever it may be. A bit like we said with solar PV, the requirements of BS 7671 still apply, and Part 6 and Guidance Notes 3. But what we would stress is that there are some differences, again, when testing the DC side of batteries. So you've got things like your manufacturer's instructions, like I said, in conjunction with BS 7671. And you can see an example there. You might not have seen this before. They use this quite a lot on pylon staking and lightning protection systems. What they'll have there is they'll have a voltage that'll have a voltage and current clamp, and that will induce a current in there. Induce a voltage, measure a current, and that will spit out a reading. And that's the safest way, really, where you're going to be able to do things like earth electrode testing in this kind of situation. So there are nuances when we're testing these kind of systems, but like I say, the training goes through that in quite a lot of detail. Oh wow, we're getting to 7 o'clock. So we are going to slightly run over. I hope that's okay with everyone here, and you're finding this useful and you found that useful. What we're going to do next then is we're going to talk a little bit to you about what to expect on a NAPIT assessment. So this was recorded with Dave Scully, our inspection manager, and Steve Melton. So have a listen to this. So if you are thinking of becoming a member, or like I say, maybe switching over, this is something where you might want to see, so we try and demystify this actual process for you. So I will stop sharing and hand over to Alex.
So we're here to discuss NAPIT inspections and the assessment process with Dave Scully, who's inspection manager for the north of England. And we're going to have a look into the assessment process, dispel any misconceptions that might be out there, and basically give a guide to anybody that's joining NAPIT for the first time, what to expect on their initial assessment, and also potentially how they vary on an annual inspection once you've already been assessed initially. So welcome, Dave. So Dave, how could you best describe what to expect on an initial assessment for a new member with NAPIT?
On a initial assessment, the important thing to realise is that we are not there to trip anybody up. The focus of the assessment is on competence. There's no trickery, literally, just to prove the member's competence on the day.
Okay, and how would that vary from an inspection for a member say that you've seen maybe 2 or 3 times and you've got a bit of history about his work, and it's an annual inspection that they would get used to over time.
Yeah, obviously, the more dealings you have with someone, the more familiar you become with that person. You know the type of question that you're going to receive. And likewise, from our perspective as the assessor, we're familiar with the standard of work that member shows us.
So from a initial inspection, Dave, what do we need to see on the day? Talk us through how the day that would run for somebody being inspected for the first time and who may be a little bit weary of the whole process.
So, first up, I always like to open the assessment with a good opening meeting. And as I mentioned in the first question, it's about putting the member at ease during that opening meeting.
First things you'd discuss, what would they be?
Basically, we'd discuss the scope of the membership. So what are you applying for? Have you been part of a scheme previously? Just trying to engage in conversation, because that can really help settle the nerves.
Yeah. Okay. So once you've had your initial meeting and probably laid out how the day's going to go, what's the next step after that?
Once we've had an opening meeting, we'll look to complete the office side of the assessment, in which case that's what we're looking for. Is we're looking for a paper trail with your customers. Is there auditable evidence of quotations through to invoice, that sort of thing? We need to make sure that the member has all the relevant insurances in place. Also go through qualifications just to verify the original certificates. Checks on the test equipment that may be used by the member. Make sure it's calibrated, it's in date. And we also have some question sets that we go through with the members whilst at the office.
And this is before you've seen one of their jobs?
This is before we go to site, yes.
Okay, so I guess this is done in a relaxed environment. Like you said, you put them at ease, and you've got to go through the sort of office-based formality questions.
Yeah, most important thing to do, try and get relaxed.
Okay, so when you've done the initial office side of the assessment, you mentioned the previous customer history and data and records, that type of thing. What if somebody's joining for the first time and doesn't have a great backlog, if any, of customer detail?
No, that's absolutely fine. As you say, it may be somebody who's literally just set up on their own. So it's a case of just going through what the requirements of the scheme are. Obviously, we wouldn't expect someone to have records if they've just set up, but it's a case of you need to maintain these records for a minimum of 6 years as per requirement, and we will come and look at these next time around.
Okay, so it's almost setting the scene for, compliant work and office-based systems whilst they're setting out on their journey of becoming an electrician, signing off work on their own.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, good. Are there any sort of misconceptions about the assessment process? What do you sort of get in terms of questions back and that may not be accurate at all?
The misconception is that some people seem to forget that when you're joining NAPIT, you're looking to become part of a self-certification scheme, or there still seems to be rumours out there that electricians would still need to go through building control. That's the reason for the joining of the scheme, in order to self-certify that work. And I think there is still an element of that out there, people not quite knowing what they can and can't do.
So we've moved from the office to the actual physical inspection of the first piece of work that they're going to show us on their onboarding journey. Talk us through what kind of things we can see, what you've seen in the past, what's ideal for an initial inspection for somebody joining.
Now, an ideal scenario for a site inspection would be, let's say, an ongoing rewire in which elements of the rewire have been completed, but elements are still at first fix. As you can appreciate, if we're doing an assessment on a completed installation, we haven't got a view of where the cables have been run. Have they been run in safe zones? So if you've got that nice balance of in progress and complete, it builds a bigger picture for us.
Right, so maybe somebody who hasn't quite had the experience to sort of manage a site all the way through that process, or anything sort of maybe less advanced that we can accept on an initial assessment?
Typically what NAPIT look for is a minimum of 2 completed circuits. It couldn't literally be a socket underneath a consumer unit and a light in the same room. It has to be something which we can gauge competence on. What we also say to members is we will assess that member based on the scope of works that they carry out. For example, it may be a member that's joining us so that they can fit EV charge points. Now, an EV charge point would typically be 2 circuits, but it is works that are representative to what that member carries out.
I see. So it's work that is fit for purpose.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So what type of things do you look for in the installation?
I should have touched upon this in the earlier question as well. One of the other misconceptions is that Part P is the only applicable building regulation, and that's what we're certifying against, which isn't completely true. There are different aspects of the building regulations which are required to be complied with any electrical installation.
Okay. Any examples other than Part P there then?
So you've got Part P, you've got Part M, and again, Part A, Part L, energy efficiency, which at the minute is quite a big one.
Topic. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, just talk us through the checks that you do on an install on site.
So typically, myself personally, I'd like to go and have a look at the incoming supply, see what the incoming supply is the service head in a good condition. Then we'd move on to the consumer unit, in which case, let's see safe isolation procedures. We'll have a look around that consumer unit. Then I like to get the member to take me around the installation. Show me what you've done here. Show me what you've done there. Then, as I say, if it's a completed installation, we may ask questions on safe zones for cables. We may ask questions on how the members drilled the joists, because these are all relevant sectors within the building regulations that would still need to be complied with.
Is there any testing looked at on the initial inspection?
Yeah, what we like to do, get a copy of the test certificate that has been issued for the job. Then what we'll do, we'll run through a variety of tests, starting from a ZEPFC. We may run all the way through all your dead testing, through all live testing. And what we'll do, we'll compare the results what are obtained during the assessment, and we'll compare them with what we've got documented on the certificate.
Somebody who's already tested the job, provided the results on a certificate, we'll just have a look again and see how they compare on the day. Any sort of tips or advice that you give at this time, or is it a case of running through what's actually been done and rechecking the result?
Yeah, at this point, this is more about the member's competence, so this is more a case of if there are any deviations, talk me through what could cause a deviation. Because I mean, it could be anything. It could be something as simple as the plaster was wet when they tested it. All these kind of things can cause deviations from what you see on the actual day, even the weather.
So these are the type of questions you'd ask potentially if you saw a result that might be a little bit out of tolerance, and maybe you'd sort of set the scene and ask the questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any tips that you would give to members on their first inspection with NAPIT in regards to how to prepare, what to have ready, just a list of sort of to-dos before the inspector arrives?
I'd probably say, and it's easy for me to say this, I'd probably say just try to relax. NAPIT sends out a checklist, so if you go through that checklist, then you're pretty much there. But what I always used to say to the guys when I was doing assessments regular is have yourself job packs. So create a job pack for each customer with all your paper trail, so quote through to a copy of the building regulations compliance certificate, keep that all in a folder, and job done.
Best practice for any electrician doing any job, big or small?
Well, other than be compliant, I'd probably just say make sure you are competent, make sure you're comfortable doing that job. Some people will take on jobs that may be a bit too big for that company. Don't be afraid to say no, because it could essentially save your business.
Can you tell us about a time when you've had to abort an assessment?
Yeah, the main one that sticks in my mind is, especially because NAPIT always primarily looks at the individual competence, it may be somebody who's always worked for a business, so they may not have done much inspection and testing. There was one chap I recall assessing, his installation work, absolutely brilliant. Absolutely, I couldn't knock the guy. But his knowledge and his lack of understanding of inspection and testing was a big concern for me. Unfortunately, I had to make the decision to recommend the guy undertook further training. But he took that on board. We did the training. I carried out the reassessment, and happily, he passed.
Good stuff. So yeah, not everyone passes every time. Obviously, we have standards and benchmarks to hit.
Yeah, and that's it. And it's important for people to realise, as I said in the beginning, we're not there to trip you up. But if there are issues, it's nothing personal. We're not having a dig. It's to try and help you progress in the business and in the industry.
What publications or documents are must-haves for an assessment?
You must have, as a minimum, access to all the building regulations. Do not print them off. Soft copies are absolutely fine, or direct access links would be absolutely fine. And the publications themselves are massive. You'll be killing a few trees at that. Again, HSR 25, which is the Memorandum of Guidance Electricity at Work Reg. That's a mandatory document, as well as copies of BS 7671 and the on-site guide.
Any NAPIT publications members can bring to assessments that are acceptable?
They're all acceptable. NAPIT on-site solutions is also used as an alternative to having to hold the on-site guide. Code breakers, absolutely brilliant one to have, especially if you're carrying out the ICRs. So we'd always recommend that to any applicant, any member, whilst we're out with them.
Okay, and the guide to inspect and test against Guidance Note 3, is that an equivalent to have?
Yeah. Again, that's a good one to have. And again, like I spoke about before, it may be somebody who's not that au fait with the inspection and testing side of things. So that's a good document to have to hand, because, and as well, during the assessment, you can make reference to these publications. You can't use it all the way through, otherwise it would really be showing a lack of competence. But there may be the odd reference in which you can refer to the publications. That's what they're there for.
Okay, for anyone joining for the first time, Dave, and maybe has an option of jobs to look at, how would you describe, from a NAPIT inspections angle, the perfect assessment to have a look at? How about the process from start to finish?
Yeah, okay, so on the office side, in ideal scenario, I've got the member, he's looked at the checklist, all documentation available, all printed out, ready to hand over, ready for me to go through. A cup of tea or coffee on arrival, that's always a good one as well. But get that checklist, get everything there on the table in place. That makes life go easier. With regards to the site inspection, in an ideal world, within 5-10 minutes of the office address, that's perfect. Customer prepped that we may have to knock power off as well. Good access to the site. That all makes for a good assessment, makes the assessment flow very well.
So all in all, we're looking at a nice morning or a nice afternoon to set aside to make sure all the check site visits and questions are answered in a good, timely, relaxed manner.
Yeah, that's the ideal scenario. Upon completion of the assessment, we'll have a closing meeting. We'll discuss any non-conformities that may have arose, and then, subject to any non-conformities that need clearing, we will be hopefully welcoming to NAPIT.
Good stuff. And how do you usually close off with a member on the finale of the inspection?
Usually wish them luck with the business. Welcome to NAPIT. Nice handshake to leave things off with.
Okay. So that then, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the webinar. Sorry it's run over a bit there, but I'm hoping that's give you a really good insight into who we are as an organisation and what we do. And obviously we've thrown in the bonus of making it technical as well, with those technical help questions and the renewables. Yeah, and obviously what you can see on your screen now, as Steve just said, we've got our latest publications and IET guides. Head over to NAPIT Direct if you want to have those publications. I've got to say, they're all great. The Code Breakers one is absolutely fantastic. Sometime next year, we're going to be launching a prosumer one, sort of renewables technology one. So hopefully a practical guide to that. So look out for that next year. So yeah, obviously, if you want to get in touch about anything you've heard today, just give the office a ring, go on the website, someone will get in touch. So hopefully that's whet your appetite for what we do as an organisation. I'm not sure if we've got anything in the chat. Obviously, we have run over, but we're happy to take any questions. If anyone's got anything burning in there, let me just have a check. No, just me saying, remember to pop your questions in the Q&A. Okay, so if that is it and no one has got anything else, we'll leave it there. But if you have got any questions, obviously you can give some of the technical help guy or any of the staff's a ring to see how to join as a member. Look out for our shows. I did mean to pop another slide in there, which is our expos, which are open to non-members. So we are in Leicester on the 25th, I think it is. Let me just double check. No, that's my diary. You don't want to see that. So let me just come back to you on the full screen there. Yeah, so look out for our expos. Go onto the website and have a look at those. Those are like an extended version of what we've looked at today, go into a lot more detail on the technical content. You get loads of free goodies. So yeah, Leicester next week. Have a look for that. That's our last one of the year, and then look out for us at shows moving into the new year in 2024. So thanks for your time today. I hope it's been useful. So yeah, thanks for attending, and take care, everybody. Good night.